Mr. Umar's heart pounded as the realization dawned on him. Ubong was the new owner? Mustapha was the first to move, reaching out to grab Ubong's shoulder for a firm hug, a smile breaking out on his face. I've been looking for you, man, Mustapha said, his voice filled with both relief and excitement. I can't believe we are meeting like this. Ubong was still trying to process the coincidence, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. I didn't think I'll see you again, he admitted, his voice thick with emotions. Mustapha shook his head, his grip to Ubong's shoulder tightening slightly. I'll never forget you, man. Ubong, I tried to find you after everything, but you just disappeared. I've kept my promise, though. I've been waiting for the right moment to reconnect. Ubong was overwhelmed. The weight of everything he had been through, suddenly feeling a little lighter. Life has been tough, man, he said quietly, not wanting to delve into the details right then. Mustapha nodded, understanding in his eyes. I can see that, but it's not over yet. I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere. I have an important meeting to catch up, but nothing is as important as seeing you today, my friend. An excited Mustapha motioned that they hop in his car and leave immediately. Ubong, so excited too, reckoned he needed to finish the cars assigned to him. We are having lots of customers, and each worker have been assigned cars for the day. Oh, don't worry. I'll wait up then, Mustapha replying. What time do you close? He asked. Ubong and Mustapha sat in a small, cozy cafe. The hum of quiet conversations and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The two men, once connected by a tragic twist of fate, now sat across from each other, reconnecting after years apart. It was a surreal moment for Ubong, who had resigned himself to a life of hard labor and limited opportunities after his release from prison. But now, here he was, sitting with Mustapha, who looked every bit the successful man he had become. A few moments of silence, where they both processed the weight of their reunion, Mustapha began to speak. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying intensity to it as he recounted the events that had unfolded after his father had secured his release from prison. Ubong, I need to tell you what happened after I got out. Mustapha began, kneeling forward slightly. My dad, he is a man of action. He doesn't waste time when it comes to family. When he found out I was involved with Uncle Jamal's robbery crew and was sentenced to prison, he ensured I was released and immediately moved me out of the country. Ubong listened intently, the memory of that chaotic time still fresh in his mind. He remembered how close they had become during their time in prison, how they had promised to look out for each other. But when Mustapha had disappeared, Ubong had feared the worst. He had been abandoned, forgotten. I didn't know how to reach you, Mustapha continued, his expression apologetic. I tried, but without knowing your surname, it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. My dad was very protective, and I was whisked away to the US so quickly, I barely had time to process everything that had happened. Ubong nodded, understanding now what had transpired. I thought you forgot about me, he admitted, his voice soft, but I see now that it wasn't the case. Mustapha shook his head firmly. Never, Ubong. I couldn't forget you even if I wanted to. You were my friend when I needed one most. And I made you a promise, one that I intended to keep no matter what. There was a brief pause as Mustapha collected his thoughts. Then he began to explain how his life had changed after leaving Nigeria. When I got to the US, it wasn't easy at first. I had to adapt quickly, but my father made sure I had everything I needed. I threw myself into my studies, working so hard to complete my education as quickly as possible. I knew I had a goal, something I needed to accomplish for both of us. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes distant as he recalled those intense years. I began working on the idea we brainstormed back in the day. You remember, don't you? The camera that covers an entire building? Ubong's face lit up with recognition. Yes, I remember. We were just teenagers then. I can't believe you actually still have that in mind. Mustapha smiled, a hint of pride in his expression. It wasn't easy, but I kept at it. I had to. I poured everything into it, my time, my energy, and all the knowledge I was gaining from my studies. And once I was done with school, I went full throttle on the project. I knew it had potential, and I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. He leaned forward, slightly his voice taking on an excited edge. With the resources and the connections I had by then, I was able to get it up and running quickly. Investors saw the potential too, especially with the way the stock market was booming at the time. The idea was revolutionary. A single camera that could cover an entire building. No need for dozens of cameras. It was cost effective, efficient, and with added infrared view, it became a game changer in the security industry. Ubong listened with a mix of awe and pride swelling within him. This was the same Mustapha he had known, the same brilliant and determined friend who had always seen the world differently. But now that potential had been realized, transformed into something tangible, something successful. And you know what? Mustapha leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile on his face. I kept my promise, Ubong. I kept aside the 10% from my cuts with Uncle Jamal for you and 30% of our company's shares, while the remaining 40% went to the stock market investors. Ubong felt a rush of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. Mustapha, I don't know what to say, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I never imagined things would turn out like this. Mustapha reached across the table, placing a hand on Ubong's arm. You don't have to say anything, Ubong. Just know that this is our success, not just mine. You helped me when I needed it most. This is actually your idea. I just brought it to life. Now it's time to reap the rewards, my friend. We are in this together, just like we were back then. Ubong nodded, feeling the weight of the past beginning to lift. Thank you, Mustapha. You've given me more than I could ever have hoped for. Mustapha smiled warmly, his eyes filled with sincerity. You deserve it, Ubong. Now let's make the most of it. We've both been through hell, but that's behind us now. The future is ours to shape. As the evening wore on, the two men continued to talk, their conversation filled with plans for the future. Now, for the first time, Ubong felt like his life was moving in the right direction, and he knew that with Mustapha by his side, there was nothing they couldn't achieve together. Ubong sat at the head of a long polished mahogany table, surrounded by board members dressed in sharp suits. The expansive windows behind him offered a breathtaking view of the skyline, a far cry from the life he once knew. Mustapha, seated to his right, exchanged a knowing glance with Ubong, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come. The moment was monumental. Ubong was officially signing the documents that named him co-founder of their rapidly growing tech company. As Ubong's pen danced across the paper, securing his position in the business world, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. From the dark, cold walls of a prison cell to this moment of triumph, his life had changed drastically. After the meeting concluded, Mustapha clapped Ubong on the back, smiling broadly. "Congratulations, my friend, you've earned this." Ubong grinned, feeling a surge of pride. "Thank you, Mustapha. I couldn't have done it without you." A few weeks later, Ubong stood in front of a magnificent house he had just purchased for himself, his siblings, and Mr. Ofon. The house was everything they had dreamed of: spacious, elegant, and full of warmth. Mr. Ufong stood beside him, her eyes misty with tears of joy as she admired the house that was now theirs. "This is incredible, Ubong," Mr. Ufon whispered, her voice heavy with emotion. Ubong turned to her, his expression soft. "This is just the beginning, Missy. You've been an anchor. This house is as much yours as it is mine." He didn't stop there. Ubong bought a smaller but beautiful home for his parents, ensuring they attended therapy sections to walk through their history of domestic violence. It was a crucial step in healing the wounds of the past and rebuilding their lives together. In addition to these personal successes, Ubong used his newfound wealth to set up an organization dedicated to the needs of prison inmates. The organization provided basic materials, but more importantly, it focused on educational systems that could awaken the minds of prisoners. At one of his many speaking engagements, where people were eager to hear his story of sudden wealth and redemption, Ubong often emphasized, "Mental awakening is everything. The walls of a prison can enclose your body, but it is the mind that suffers the real captivity. Free your mind, and the possibilities are endless." One evening, as Ubong and Mr. Ufong were lounging in their new home, a thought struck him. He turned to Mr. Ufong, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Why don't I buy the restaurant where it all started? The place where my life took a turn." Mr. Ofon laughed, a warm melodic sound that filled the room. "That's an excellent plan, Ubong. It will bring everything full circle." The restaurant was abuzz with whispers. The news of a new owner had spread like wildfire, and the employees were curious, even a bit anxious. Mr. Omar, the manager who had once held so much power in the establishment, was no exception. He stood near the back, wiping his sweaty palms on his pants, uneasy about the day's event. When Ubong walked into the restaurant, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, the room fell silent. His presence commanded attention, and as he moved through the space, it became clear to everyone that this was no ordinary man. Mr. Umar's heart pounded as the realization dawned on him. Ubong was the new owner? Ubong watched as every worker was interviewed for their positions. When it was Mr. Umar's turn, Ubong decided to personally handle the interview. Mr. Umar walked into the office, his face pale, his hands trembling. Ubong sat behind the desk, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Umar," Ubong began, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I thought you knew why you were here." The older man stammered, unable to look Ubong in the eyes. I'm sorry, Ubong, sir. I'm sorry for everything, sir." Ubong remained silent, his gaze piercing through Mr. Imon's defenses. The room seemed to close in on him as Mr. Umar, now on the verge of tears, made a shocking confession. I planted it. I planted that watch in that backpack that got you arrested. Mr. Umar admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, shaking. I was jealous. I was jealous of how everyone adored you. You were just a server, and yet even the VIPs loved you more than me. I wanted you gone, and I did it out of spite. I'm sorry. As Mr. Imam's words hung in the air, Ubong felt a whirlwind of emotions. His mind flashed back to the moment he was accused. The disappointed look on Mr. Mm's face, the VIP who had wanted to sponsor his education, the sounds of the judge's gavel as she sentenced him twice, the harsh life in prison, the bully, the pain. It came flooding back, and for a moment he was that young man again, lost, betrayed, and bitter. But then something shifted. Ubong looked at Mr. Omar, truly seeing him for the first time. The man before him was broken, consumed by guilt and regret. And in that moment, Ubong made a choice. Thank you, Mr. Umar, Ubong said, his voice steady but laced with deep emotion. Thank you for your ill intentions. If you hadn't done what you did, not that they were good acts, I wouldn't be where I am today. Perhaps life would have taken another turn, who knows? But for how things have turned out, I thank you for hating me when you did. I have forgiven you. Mr. Imor stared at Ubong, disbelief etched on his face. He thought for a brief, hopeful moment that he might get his old job back, that Ubong's forgiveness would mean a fresh start. But Ubong had other plans. However, Ubong continued, his tone now firm. As a first-hand victim of your devious intentions, I am offering you a job, not as a manager, but as a server. When your actions reflect a true change of heart, then we can talk about upgrading your position. The room was thick with tension, but Ubong felt a sense of peace. He had faced his past, confronted his demons, and emerged stronger. As Mr. Imor nodded in acceptance, tears streaming down his face, Ubong knew this was the closure he needed, not just for himself, but for the man who had wronged him. The restaurant thrived under Ubong's ownership, becoming a symbol of transformation and second chances. Customers flocked not just for the food, but for the story behind the establishment. A story of redemption, forgiveness, and the power of a changed mind. Ubong's organization continued to expand, reaching inmates across the country, giving them hope and a future. His speaking engagements grew in numbers, and people from all walks of life came to hear his inspiring words. The mind is the true battlefield, Ubong would say. Prison isn't just a place with bars and walls, it is a state of mind. Free your mind and you will free your life. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you learned from this story. And please don't forget to subscribe and share to your loved ones. I love you. Mwah.